Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video we are going to cover the flight deck preparation of the iniBuilds A300. So we are still aligning our IRSs, as you can see, and that is basically where our flight deck preparation is going to start. So this is the procedure you do after the safety checks and the maintenance checks have been completed. And we are going to start straight down here on the FMS by going to the menu and then to the FMS, leading us to the status page. We can see we've got an A300-600R and we've got the CF6 engines, and we make sure that our database is active down there. Now, once that is done, we go to the init page over here. And this is where we're going to start with our basic part of the setup at first. So it says align IRS down here, we're going to clear that. But before you clear any scratchpad message, you just take a look at it, make sure that it is actually applicable to your phase of flight. Alright, so we are going to fill out the from and to. So we are at KMSP, flying to KIND, Minneapolis to Indianapolis. Alright, going to insert that up here, and you could select the company route if there was any saved over here. However, we don't have one saved for now, so we are just going to return, and that's it. Also, we're going to enter our alternate, which is going to be KSDF, and it would help if I would type that correctly, so KSDF. Alright, and we're going to insert that over here. Same thing, if there was an alternate route available, we would use it. We don't have one, so we return. Next up, we verify that the latitude and longitude shown up here are correct. Now, you can have a look at your charts in order to confirm that. However, there are not necessarily charts published for everything, so it might be there or it might not. In any case, I'll just show you where to get that data. So we go on to the airport charts over here for our departure. And then there might be stuff like airport info or takeoff minima or parking gate coordinates. Now, this is the one that we're looking for. And over here, we can now have a look into our published coordinates. However, as you can see, we're currently parking at the cargo apron, and it looks like that might not actually be published. So, what we can do is just go over here. We are showing on the infield cargo apron, and it looks to me like that is actually not part of the published coordinates. So unfortunately, we'll just have to live with that. And as you can see, not on the parking chart and nowhere else. So looks like we'll just have to live without those coordinates. So what we can always do is just a general check. So at any of the concourses, we're roughly at 4452.8 and it's 4452.9, so that's good enough. And the longitude is like west 9312.0 and we are showing 9313.3. That's close enough. When the coordinates are verified, we hit the align IRS prompt, and that is going to align our IRSs now. Alright, so from here on, we'll just leave the FMS alone, and we'll do the rest of the FMS setup later. We just need to do this in order to get the IRS alignment process running properly. From here on, we are going to start with the rest of our flight deck setup. Now, before we do that, let's quickly head into the EFB again, go to the My Flight icon, and over here we can import our flight from SimBrief. And that's the first thing we do. Then we go back to the main page and onto the weight and balance menu, and over here we can start loading up our cargo. Today we're carrying the racing team charter, so we are going to load that up, and then we can simply hit either update from SimBrief, which is going to synchronize your cargo and your fuel with SimBrief, like so. But it's also going to change the weights that we've got in the plane. But let's just do it like this, and then we verify our fuel up there, 25,447 pounds. We're just going to round that up, so let's make it 26,000 pounds in here. So 26,000. Thank you. and then we can click apply to aircraft. And that is going to slowly start refueling our plane. So as you can see, it takes like 6 minutes now for our airplane to be refueled. Now that we've got fuel in the plane, we can go ahead and do the rest of our flight deck setup. So the flight deck preparation is going to start on the overhead panel, and it is going to follow a certain scheme. So you can see the panel is basically separated into vertical components like this. No, not like this, but like this. And that is exactly how we are going to do the panel scan. So we start on the lower left, make sure that the no smoking sign is on auto, and the seatbelt sign. On a passenger aircraft, you can turn it on as soon as refueling is completed. On a cargo aircraft, you'll turn it on in the before start procedure. Then we move up to the lights and tune the lights as applicable. Move up to the hydraulic panel, making sure that the fluid quantities within the green arc, the engine pumps are in auto down here, and the electric pumps are as needed, so we are going to keep them off at this point. Then we move further up, make sure that, again, nothing is turned on over here. So for example, this is what we don't want. And getting to the flight recorder panel, we turn on the ground control button. Now the ground control button on the flight recorder is basically going to energize the cockpit voice recorder before the first engine start. That's a legal requirement that things like the pre-flight briefing are recorded. For that reason we turn the recorder on at this point. If this was off like this, then the recorder would automatically power up as soon as we start our first engine. But we turn it on manually in order to ensure that we are recording our briefings as legally required. Next up, we move back down to the lights. We're going to switch the strobe light into auto and select nav and logo lights to either position 1 or position 2. The rest of the lights can remain off at this point. The anti-ice should be off, and then we can move up over here, and we are going to turn on the ATS switches. We're going to turn on the yaw dampers and the pitch trim. However, the pitch trim can only be turned on once your IRS alignment is complete. So you can see the IRS is still aligning at this point. For this reason, we cannot turn on the pitch trim right now, so we have to come back to this later. Basically, we follow the extinguish all white lights principle over here. So, following that logic, we turn on the galley. Then we move further up and we do the engine 1 fire test. We start with the squib test up here, making sure that we see both the squibs illuminated. Then we can do the loop test. And again, together with the loops, we also get the associated ECAM indications. Pretty much like that. Okay. Then we can have a look at the electrical panel. However, basically there's not a lot that we need to do over here. We can check that our batteries are showing fine voltage, like that. But, again, can do it, or you can lead it. Basically, we want to select the essential feed and we want the emergency power selected up here, so both switches in the 12 o'clock position. Moving up, we've got the HF radio, but this one is not simulated in the iniBuilds A300. Basically, we just want to make sure that the HF radio is off. Okay then, moving down to the next part, wipers off, APU as needed, ignition off. At this point at least, we're going to deal with that later for the engine start. Then we move up to the fuel panel, and if the refueling is in progress, do not change the fuel pump configuration. When the refueling is complete, we're going to turn all the pumps on. So right now we're still fueling, so we are not going to touch them. Okay, then we can move further up. We already did the APU fire test, and not a lot for us to do up here. We can do the CBR test, making sure that that needle is advancing, but that's only for the first flight of the day, so otherwise you don't need to worry about that. Then we move down to the next part. Over here, make sure that the rate limiter is set to norm, that none of the lights are illuminated, and a couple of basic indications we want to see on our pressurization controls. So on the ground, the outflow valves are always supposed to be fully open, differential pressure is 0, and the cabin vertical speed obviously is 0, or at least close to it as well. And the cabin altitude equals your field elevation. In our case, that's some 500 feet-ish. Moving further up, we get to the window heat and the probe heat switches, and those are all going to be turned on at this point. And we make sure that the lights are going off. Then we've got the cargo compartment smoke detection. Those switches are in the armed position. And we move further up, and we've got our engine number 2 fire test. So again, this one works exactly like the other one. So first we start with a squib test, making sure both squib lights illuminate. Then we do the loop test down here. So we've got the loop, we got the chime. Now we've got the second loop. When both are triggering, then the engine fire warning is triggered. Likewise, when both loops fail, then the warning is triggered as well. Then we can go further up, and we basically don't need to do anything here. Cockpit door is showing open at the moment. That's because we did open it, and the HF2 radio, again, doesn't really matter in the simulation. Then we can go down to the last part of the overhead panel. We arm the emergency lights. We make sure that our annunciator lights are bright or dim as needed. At this point, if you started the APU and the APU bleed is not on yet, that's a good point to turn it on and make sure that the lines on the panels over here are looking sensible. Going further up, the temperature controls, you can basically just leave them all on auto. In the real world, you would be playing around with them because automatic control never is that good on aircraft, so your car is certainly going to have a much better air conditioning than your aircraft, but over here you could be playing around with this. Okay, going further up, we make sure that there are no further white lights and that the oxygen pressure is in the green. And with that, we are now done on the overhead panel. Now remember, I told you earlier that as soon as the IRS is aligned, which is the case now, we can turn on the pitch trim over here as well. Do note that those pitch trim switches are also associated with your FCU, with the flight control unit. You can see this is turned off at the moment. If you ever find your FCU to be turned off, then the trick to get it on is to turn on the pitch trim switches up here. You can see now the FCU is actually coming on as well. So that's a little trick that is really worth noting on the Airbus A300 and Airbus A310 aircraft. Okay, and finally, since our refueling has in the meantime been completed as well, we just quickly verify that the fuel quantity is good. So let's go down to the Ecam fuel page and quickly check that. 26,000 pounds. And as we can see over here, the left inner tank is feeding the APU. Very good. So now that we've verified this, we can turn on all the fuel pumps as well. Remember, only turn these on when the refueling is completed. Okay, perfect. So with that now done, we can move a little bit further down and we are going to get to the main panel. Now, few things over here. On the side down here, you've got a lot of light controls. For example, you've got the instrument lighting system up here, which is going to backlight all your instruments. You have to set those lights as you desire. I'm going to leave them off for today's flight. Then over here, make sure that there is no white lights. For example, this is what it might look like. Now that's a blue light, obviously, but you get the idea. And you want to make sure that your PFD is on the top. Okay, moving on then to the actual instruments themselves. On the speed indicator, there's not a lot that we can actually do there. Moving over to the altimeter, however, we can go ahead and set our QNH. So let's go to the MyFlight app once more. Just make sure we get the latest weather, and the QNH is 2995. So let's go over here. The left knob is going to set your little buck over there, and the right knob is going to select the QNH. And what I'll do is I'll select the buck to the field elevation. That is going to help me later on to determine our acceleration altitude, which is going to be 1,000 above the field elevation. If it was 1,500 above field elevation, you might just set it to the opposite side. The general idea is just to have something set that is going to be useful for you during your flight. So That is what we do on our entire instrument setup. Then we can move over to the clock and select our elapsed timer as needed. Obviously, it's going to be off for now, and the same goes for the chrono, which is also off. Moving on to the standby instruments, we erect our standby ADI. Okay, it takes a little bit. Here we go. And then we also set the QNH on the standby altimeter. Now, over here, things get a little bit more interesting now. Next up, we are going to move to the accumulator brake pressure indicator. And over here, we are going to check the alternate braking system. In order to do that, we are going to take the brake any-skid switch and set that down into the alternate on position. So braking mode is now alternate, and the any-skid is on. Now, when we've selected that, we are going to release our park and brake. Make sure that the chocks are in place before you do that though. So let's quickly go over here. We go to the ground equipment and toggle chocks. Okay, so the chocks are in place now. Now we can safely release the park and brake. And when the park and brake is released, then we're going to press our brake pedals. You can see the brake pressure must work pretty much symmetrically. Now, let's go to the alternate any-skid off function down there, and interestingly enough, there is nothing happening right now. That's of course the show effect. This did work fine. Well, let me just do one thing. Okay, so the chocks do trigger the park and brake internally of the aircraft. Okay, so let me just show you that check one more time. So, this is the original position that we are going to be in. So, park and brake and any skid switch is normal and on. Now we go to alternate on and we release our park and brake. You can see that the brake pressure indication is now going down. Now we're going to apply our brakes manually, and we make sure that the pressure is rising symmetrically and without delay on both sides. Like that. Okay. Now we are going to release our brake pedals again, and we set our park and brake once more, and obviously pressure is coming back up since the park and brake is now powering the brake system. And now we select the brake any-skid switch back to normal and on. Like that, we have now checked that the alternate brake system is working. Now, the brake pressure indicator is always going to show you the alternate brake system, not the primary brakes. So do keep that in mind. Now, after you've done this check, you will notice that the accumulator pressure has reduced quite a bit. The reason for that is that the hydraulic system is not powered at the moment. So if this is getting into the rather low side, by default you should have 7 applications, but it can be less based on experience with Airbus aircraft. So if you want to recharge this, there's an easy way to do so. So the system is connected to the yellow hydraulic system. So over here, if we want to pressurize or if we want to refill the accumulator brake pressure, we just need to power the yellow hydraulic system. In order to do that, and this is not mandatory unless the accu pressure is getting too low, but right now I would rather want to recharge this. So what we are going to do is, first of all, we're going to call the ground engineer and just talk to them to make sure that all the areas of the airplane are clear. So, for example, we are talking about things like the nobody standing close to the gear doors or to any control surface over here. And when we are sure that everything is clear outside, then we can go to the hydraulic, turn on the electric pump that is going to pressurize the green system, as we can see down here. And since we now want to pressurize the yellow system, we can turn on the power transfer unit up here. When that is on, you can now see the yellow system pressurizes, and the accu brake pressure is going to rise in a few moments. Here you go. Pressure is rising, and with that we also got more brake pressure available now. And this is really how fast it goes in the actual airplane as well. So now that the system is repressurized, we can turn off the PTU and the electric pump once again, and like that we have now recharged our accumulator pressure. Alright, and that is as easy as it gets. So if we move forward now, Then we make sure that the auto brake lights are extinguished. We make sure that the reverse lights are extinguished. We can select our landing elevation. And for that, let's quickly go into our charts and pick some arrival chart. So for example, we just take an ILS approach onto runway 5 right. And we can see touchdown zone elevation is 800 feet. So we select 800 up here. Like so. Okay, moving on then, we get to our landing gear warning and we're going to execute the test. So press that button up here and we get the landing gear unsafe, landing gear position detection system 1 fault, and it wants us to select system number 2. Now that is all we need to do and we're done with this. The position detection itself is going to switch to system 1 when the captain is pilot flying, or system 2 when the first officer is pilot flying. So we're going to keep it on system 1. Going further down, the brake fan is switched off. Alright, that leads us down to the pedestal. Over here we make sure that the speed brake is retracted and disarmed. We are going to check the takeoff warning system, and that can be done quite easily. We're going to advance thrust lever number 1. And now the config warning system detects slats are not in takeoff config, the parking brake is on, and the engine oil temp is low, so it tells us exactly why we are not supposed to take off. Okay. Return the thrust lever to idle, and then we can repeat the same with thrust lever number 2 to make sure that the sensor is actually working on both sides. Okay then. Going further down, the fuel switches are off. Then we can move down to our ecam control. We can press the recall. Everything's showing normal, very good. Then we can clear out anything there might be. And that is it. Okay then, so moving further down, we select our transponder as needed. That's here in the middle, and we're going to switch our TCAS to above, and we can keep the range over here. So that's showing 6 nautical miles right now, and we're going to keep that, so we're not going to touch that. And that is basically it on the transponder and TCAS. Next up, we set our radios as needed, so we don't need an ADF today, so we can disregard that. We make sure that our rudder trim is showing 0, and do note, in order to reset this, you would need hydraulic pressure. Finally, weather radar. We can switch it into the test mode and just check that out. So let's put the weather radar on into test mode, and here is what we got. Okay, very good. So weather radar going back off and back to the weather or the turbulence mode. I prefer the turbulence mode personally, and we can select the tilt of about 5 degrees up for our takeoff. Alright, and that is our setup completed. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. In the next one, we are going to start filling out the FMS. For now, thank you very much, and as always, if you did like the video, be sure to leave a like in YouTube as well, as it does help with the algorithms. And I am very much looking forward to see you subscribing to the channel if you're interested in more videos like this one. Finally, if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. But for now, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching, and see you all again on the next one.